Welcome to Bake to the Future. We bring you a fresh take on the latest trends and issues impacting the baking sector through exclusive insights and conversations. Brought to you by the American Bakers Association.
Hi, welcome to Bake to the Future. I'm Haley Blumenreich.
And I'm Katie Jewell.
And today we are doing an update for you on all things policy, bringing you the latest of what is happening in Washington, D.C. that bakers need to know.
And we promise it won't be a snooze fest, guys. Promise. The baking sector continues to face challenges related to the supply chain, COVID vaccine and testing in the workplace, edible oils, and more. And hopefully our conversation today will help explain what's happening, what ABA is doing about it, and especially as we head into the holidays, a lot of these topics are going to be very important to bakers. So we're going to welcome our first guests, ABA's President and CEO, Rob Mackey, and ABA's Senior Vice President of Government Relations and Public Affairs, Lee Sanders. Welcome, guys.
Welcome.
Hey, Katie, Haley. Thanks so much for having us today.
And then later in the show, we're going to talk to Rasmus Vonners, Vice President of Regulatory and Technical Services, and Lauren Williams, Director of Government Relations. Rob, let's start with you. Let's talk about supply chain. One of the phrases I know that you use often is that the supply chain that is often straight is in knots. It has been for the last year and a half, going on 2 years. So give us an update. What's going on?
Yeah, thank you, Katie. And it's clear to say that this challenges just continue to accelerate. You go back to the beginning of the pandemic and with all of the shutdowns around the world, our supply chain, even in baking, people may not think about it. Average people don't think about it, but baking, we're part of that global supply chain. So when, ingredients can't be made or packaging can't be produced and shipped in a timely fashion, it's a real challenge. And everything that we hear when we talk to our members is those challenges just continue to accelerate. We're also hearing that these challenges are not going away. There's been a lot of I would say, noise in the public sphere that, we're days and weeks away from all of this being figured out. The people that we talk to that follow this stuff, that have the expertise, are telling us, Q3 of 22, maybe Q4 of 22, would be the earliest that a lot of these things would settle out. And so it really is, it's like you've taken the entire global supply chain, think of it as a rope, you've tied it in a dozen knots, and some of it, is just going to take time to unwind. What we're doing at ABA is we're focusing in on the things that we can impact, which we'll talk about, in terms of the ingredients, in terms of, putting pressure on the Biden administration to step in to fix the logjam at the ports. It's a big issue, but also in terms of some of our domestic policy issues around biofuels and a number of other areas where, the government action or inaction is adding problems and challenges to the whole supply chain crisis.
And we had a supply chain episode with you, Rob, and Lee earlier in the spring in May. What would you say has changed or not changed really since the spring? Lee, do you want to take that one?
That is a great question. And I would say the multiple pressures that we were seeing before have just multiplied. And so where you've got workforce issues, those continue. Logistical issues at the ports, and also just having available drivers, having folks that can work on the production lines, supplies of all different sorts, whether it be steel for the bakery equipment, packaging, and then, of course, you have ingredients, very basic things that are needed so that our members can produce their products and get them to the grocery shelves, get them to food service, to the restaurants, or for federal feeding programs. I would say since we had that earlier podcast, everything, the pressures have doubled down. We're in a crisis mode, and we're working harder than ever for our members to come up with workable solutions to help them keep their businesses operational.
There's just so many targets here. How, our members are nose down doing their work. We're also nose down doing our work. And I think there's so many mysteries around what we do. Like, it's very hard to explain. So why don't you talk us through some of the things, these big issues that we're talking about? What are we doing about it?
Yeah, that's a great question, Katie. And it's not just the big issues. We've gotten involved in a lot of smaller issues. For instance, the issue of wooden pallets this summer and the lumber issue never would have, thought it would have had an impact on the baking industry. But reaching out to some of the pallet manufacturing groups and explain that, we're doing a lot of kind of hands-on holding. We're also, around packaging. There's an ebb and flow. And I think the best way to summarize at a macro level, Katie, is, we used to call ourselves the original just-in-time supply chain. Truckload of flour would come in to a bakery, you'd mix it with salt water and yeast, and you would produce delicious products. Now it's a just-in-case, and it's everything. It's spare parts for, ovens and bakery equipment. It's having extra packaging on hand, extra ingredients. And the other thing that's really changed is I think bakers are multi-sourcing their supplies. So it used to be they might have a group of, designated suppliers, long-time relationships with those suppliers. And they realized that in some cases, no fault of the supplier, they're all part of that supply chain issue too, that they need other suppliers just in case.
Yeah, I would say Rob's exactly right. And I mean, you've got to have different strategies than you've had before. And I think the most important thing that drives us when we're talking to government officials, looking for solutions is, what we're hearing from the members. We're doing a really good job of listening to the members, hearing what their concerns are, what is impacting their bottom lines and their ability to produce product and get it to the shelf. And so having that basis, that important information has helped us throughout COVID and throughout this crisis to make sure that we're focused in a very laser focused way to do the best we can for our members.
Yeah, and I would add to that, Lee makes a great point. I would add to that, one of the most important things that we've done is, and one of the things that we learned during the COVID is we now, have a great relationship, both up and downstream in our supply chain. We're spending a lot of time with our partners at the Food Marketing Institute, the National Grocers Association, the National Restaurant Association, understanding and communicating. One of the things that we're sort of preaching, if you will, is transparency to your customers, transparency, from the suppliers to the bakers, so that people just understand and try to minimize the surprises that continue to just pop up every day. And it's really leaning on those relationships. You and Haley have done a phenomenal job in terms of developing communication toolkits to give to our members, whether they're a baker or a supplier, to just help understand and explain to their customers what's going on. And the feedback we have heard from the members has been overwhelmingly positive. So I think there's no one single answer. It is a multifaceted, multidimensional approach that we're taking. So it's policy, communications, relationships.
And those can be found in our media center at americanbakers.org. So getting into a little bit of the nuts and bolts then. So talking about policy and everything, you hear the words right now, reconciliation and infrastructure packages coming out of Congress. It just seems like there's two big bills happening that are legislatively joined together, meaning that they've always been partnered together, right? And so what's in those packages that's on the news every day? There's all this fighting, people not just even inside of both parties, it sounds like. What does it mean for our members? What's in those packages that we care about, and what are we doing to help advocate those things?
I want to touch the linkage before let Lee and others jump in. The linkage it's a political exercise in that the infrastructure is sort of being held to gain votes from moderate Democrats on the budget reconciliation process. And so just to be really clear, they're not linked, in terms of legislation, but it's a political linkage. And so there's agreements to move the infrastructure bill once an agreement has been reached on the outline of the reconciliation package. And that's about as far in the weeds that I want to go because it gets really dense quick. But I think in terms of infrastructure, and Lee can certainly elaborate, I mean, there are a number of things in there. Obviously, we're a large user of logistics, transportation. And so, we have, depending on who you ask, the fourth or fifth largest fleet of vehicles on the road. So roads and bridges, which we all know are seriously challenges, are big. But again, what we were talking about earlier about the issue at the ports and driver shortages, there's a really important provision in the infrastructure package that we've been supporting for a number of years. And last but not least, we felt it was really important, when government works, we should be supporting that. And so we actually have a bipartisan piece of legislation that we care about. Is it perfect? No. But it's got a couple of things that we care about that are important, but it's also important to get the process moving. So that's why we're in on that. Reconciliation is a totally different animal. It is a hodgepodge of tax provisions. It's like everybody talks about the old Christmas tree approach, to legislating. I mean, this is a whole forest of Christmas trees. And let me just say, it's decorated in Halloween-like colors. There's corporate taxes, individual taxes. It's loaded up with, things like the PRO Act, although that looks like it slipped out. And that is a very, again, another hodgepodge of sort of labor policy going back. Some of this stuff goes back to the 70s. In the totality of it, the reconciliation package would have a significant negative impact on our economy, on the baker's economy. There's a lot of provisions in there that we have really strong objections to. The thing this country needs today, coming out of COVID, is we need a very robust economic recovery, and we need a tax policy structure that supports that development, workforce development, a whole host of things, research and development. All of those things are really, really important. And where Congress is headed right now is they're headed down a path that's going to make the current economic situation even worse. And that's not good for anybody.
I would agree with Rob. And, I would just add on there that these are expensive initiatives that have been included in the reconciliation. And the business community is the one that's going to end up paying for these items through the tax structure, through potential tax changes. And those tax changes are not going to incentivize businesses to stay and do their work domestically. And so that is a concern. In some ways, certainly the changes that would be made would also disincentivize expansion of businesses. And that certainly has implications for our members as well.
I would say it's like a trading bazaar, on the floor of Congress right now, where there's it's all about getting to a number, and it's all about and the number is the right amount of votes in the Senate, the right amount of votes in the House. And so the wheeling and dealing and the trading is unprecedented. I've been in this town 30 years. I've never seen a situation like this. And there's no conversation about what the impacts of these policy initiatives individually, let alone collectively, are going to have on our broader economy or even the baking industry. Nobody knows. It's just a giant trading bazaar about getting to a number that's palatable for enough folks to vote for it in the Senate and the House.
So what does that look like for you, Lee? How are you communicating that to the lawmakers?
Well, that's a good question, Haley. And, one of the things that we always do when we're going up to the Hill and talking even to agencies on our advocacy work is painting the picture of what it means for the bakeries day to day. How is it going to impact, their staff? How is it going to impact their processes? What does it mean for the future of their business? And so, we have a unique opportunity to share that perspective. No one else can do that. We're better at that than anyone else. And because we listen to our members, we know what that means. We are listening and hearing every day what their concerns are. And so being able to convey those really can make a difference when it comes down to that negotiating time. And as we know, as Rob had mentioned, it is literally changing hour by hour. We know that, they are looking to vote on this at Halloween. and that date may work, it may not work, and that's yet to be seen. But we do know there's a lot of negotiation that will still go on, and that's why it's important for our voice to be strong and be visible.
And going back to what you were talking about, and I think I want to start bringing in Lauren and Rasma a little bit. You mentioned how the story that we paint to lawmakers has to do with telling the story of our members on the ground, what they do day to day. And there are some things happening now with vaccine and testing mandates that would very much affect the day to day of how our members operate. So I know Rasma and Lauren, you both have things that you're working on. And of course, Rob and Lee, we invite you to poke your head in. But talk to us about what's going on. Right now, we're sitting in late October of 2021. What's your crystal ball? I always ask you, Lauren, where's your crystal ball?
Yeah, my crystal ball is a little murky these days, but we're trying. So just kind of to back it up a little bit of how this all started. So in September, the president announced this COVID-19 action plan. And in the action plan, it called on OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, to issue this emergency temporary standard on vaccination and testing. So it required that employers with 100 or more employees, that they either ensure their employees are vaccinated or they test them weekly, and they would have to get these negative tests weekly from their employees. So this is a pretty huge deal for our members, and it will have a big impact on the way they run their operations. Unfortunately, that's all we know right now. So OSHA then got to working on this type of a rulemaking. And in October, we know they sent it over to the Office of Management and Budget, and this is kind of the final check before we see this rulemaking come out. So ABA has gone over to the Office of Management and Budget, and we participated in 3 separate meetings on the issue where we could really dive into how we thought this would impact the baking industry. And again, we have very limited knowledge on what is actually in this rulemaking. So we're kind of talking about it from a larger perspective of this is going to have a huge impact on our workforce. We already are having workforce issues. And if you mandate this, it's going to create even potentially more problems for us. And additionally, which Rasma will kind of get into, we talked about the supply concerns. If an employer chooses not to mandate the vaccine, they're going to go the testing route in order to comply with the OSHA regulation. Do we have enough COVID-19 testing supply out there for employers to go that route? So there's a lot of different things that we really talked about in these meetings, and we're hoping that we got that message through to them. Unfortunately, again, we don't know quite where their head's at, where this is going. It hasn't come out yet as of this recording. It could change any day now.
And just to back up, so I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but I know that I've asked this question before too. So when something is an emergency, what's it's
temporary
ETS
standard.
Okay, so that's something that the process of making that rule is different than like a normal rule that would come out of these regulatory bodies. So it's fast tracked, right? And so because it's fast tracked, there's less time or opportunity for outside input, which we've gotten. It sounds like, we've had these meetings, but there's just a lot less time to get that input. And so that's where some of this like confusion and this unclear, like we would normally have a lot more clarity into what is happening. Am I right on that?
You're absolutely right, Katie. Normally, the rule we get a proposed rule, so we see what the text is, what we're working with, and we can comment on it. In an emergency temporary standard, we don't see anything. It comes out, it goes into effect, and then we can comment on it. So we're kind of behind it because it's such an emergency. They don't have time to go through the whole rulemaking process.
Okay, so this emergency temporary standard will happen at some point, at some time. It will likely have in there what the president said about companies more than 100 employees will have to test or have their employees vaccinated, right? And so you were talking about the concern, and Rasma, I want you to start talking with us about the supply issues with testing. So what is going on with that? What are we doing? What can members expect?
Well, thanks, Katie. Again, thanks for having us today to kind of dive into these topics at a higher level. One of the things, as we've talked about, is supply chain. The issues certainly continue. And one of the things that ABA did proactively at the recommendation of one of our members that engaged in this group in Canada was join the Rapid Action Consortium, which is a group of private sector organizations, nonprofit associations such as ABA, academia, scientists, and we're working together to try to reduce the costs and complexity of providing quick tests, rapid tests, to businesses in the United States. I think prior to the White House's announcement, this group had already been gearing up. Many of our companies have already been exploring opportunities to use testing as another safety net, in addition to masking and social distancing for their employees to make sure to keep that workforce safe so that we can continue to bring great products to the marketplace for the consumers. And what we have seen more recently after the September announcement through the Rapid Action Consortium is that there had been some significant time delays that suddenly were coming up with respect to our participants in the consortium having ability to get the tests. I mean, typically, the agreement that the consortium members have is on a timeline of less than like a 3 to 5 day window to get those tests. And we saw that suddenly move out to several weeks. We also, you purchase in a certain amount of tests. And some of those were being, you would either get half of the amount, you would get, a third of your order and so forth. And I think the biggest thing that we saw, now this has improved in recent weeks. We just had a consortium call yesterday and the supply has stabilized a bit. But several weeks ago, we did see that, the federal government was stepping in and pulling a lot of the tests that had been procured for other businesses for their own use. As I said, we've seen it stabilize a bit, but the concern certainly is, as we have seen throughout the pandemic, that we had challenges with getting gloves, face masks, other sorts of things. And that when we do have the emergency temporary standard issued, I do feel that we'll have a number of members that do opt to go the testing route and to make sure that we continue to have supply and demand working properly to get access to those tools for our members to use.
So it's private groups and private companies coming together to figure out what's available and making sure that there's enough, right? So
correct. And I think they've also done more. It's not just, so they're working directly with like Abbott and Quidel, who are the actual manufacturers of the test. They have direct communication. So they will set up a route for, Rob Mackey's Bakery to have direct communication with Abbott. They've also developed a series of playbooks and toolkits to help you implement based on, the size of your plant, the type of operation that you have. I mean, we have people engaged in this. We've had several baking companies now join as of this week. We have an ingredient supplier that's participating. You have large banking companies throughout the U.S. participating, and they all have slightly different scenarios and different playbooks that they're using. For example, one of the larger banks that's participating, they have a vaccine mandate across all staff, but they're also requiring them to test twice a week prior to coming into the office. So there's a lot of mixing and matching, but we try through the consortium to provide those tools. Once you join the consortium, you're actually hooked up with a buddy that has gone through the process so that you have that one-to-one contact with someone to kind of work through some of the challenges that you may see if this is an option that you would like to implement.
Does it cost money to join the consortium?
Not at all. The only thing that we ask is sort of a pay it forward, help spread the word about the consortium. We've been engaged as ABA since April, and we're seeing an uptick in participation, and it's nice to see the industry engaging in this as well.
The core of this testing program is high quality, very verifiable, certifiable results in a short turnaround. So it's designed to be perfect to capture people as they're showing up for their shift at the bakery and get a quick result, but a high quality result, because I know there's been a lot of conversation around the different testing protocols.
Absolutely. And I think to Rob's point, one of our members that is using this program right now, they have some of their employees, you can swab your nose in the car 15 minutes before you enter. If I will say that we have, through the ABA participants that have been actively engaged, I believe they've caught 4 positives before they've been able to get into the plant, which is awesome because that's the way that the program is designed. Now, I will say that if you test positive, the recommendation then would be that you follow up with a PCR test, which is the test that gets results in several days just to confirm. But again, if you show up, you test positive, they want to isolate that individual to try to keep that workforce safe.
All right. Before we move on to the next topic, I guess this question could be for anybody who can speak up. So, what's going to happen with this emergency standard is we'll get some sort of a notification. There'll be a press release. It will hit our inboxes, and then our members will say, "Okay, now what?" And I will also say, "What do we tell them?" So, when this thing goes down, what happens then?
That's a great question, Katie. So once the rule officially will be published in the Federal Register, which is how it has to officially be published in the Federal Register in order for the rule to go into effect. So it will be published in the Federal Register that day. We will, of course, alert members immediately to the fact that it is out. And after that, it will go into effect. Now, usually once it goes into effect, there is a compliance period, and we don't know what that time frame will be. It could be 60 days, it could be 30 days. And we can, of course, ask, let's say they come out with a 30-day compliance period. We could always ask them to extend that to 60 days because of specific bakery concerns. So I think, after it comes out, we definitely want input from members about how this is going to impact them. And if they have questions, we can also help them to get those answers. And we want to continue to be their voice there.
And I just envision a lot of emails flurrying around when this thing happens. And so I guess the short answer is we're on it when it does happen, and that we'll help make sure that members know what to do. And if we feel like it needs to be changed, we will change it as much as we possibly can. Okay, so I'm gonna transition over to Haley. I'm gonna step away from the mic for a bit. I feel like I've been talking a lot. So we're changing gears now. So this again might bring in a few of you guys to help us on a topic that is also changing quite a bit, but also impacts our members a lot.
Yes, and that would be the edible oils issues that are going on. And maybe, Rasma, you could start us off by kind of explaining what is going on and what ABA has been working on around it.
Well, I would like to tag team this with Lee. I think it's been, this came up from the commodity side, but unfortunately it's the Environmental Protection Agency that has sort of created the framework where this is a challenge. In a nutshell, each year, so there is a renewable fuels program under the Clean Air Act by statute. So EPA has implemented this program for many years now. And each year they need to propose what they're going to have for blending renewable fuel obligations. So what amount of renewables do you blend with gasoline? It's to help protect from emissions from the gasoline itself. Excuse me. And normally EPA would propose these volume obligations in the spring of a year. So like spring of 2021, spring of 2020. But they missed their 2021 deadline. And they have also missed their 2022 deadline because we would have seen that this spring. And the significant concern that we have is specific to the level that's being looked at and set for biodiesel and advanced biofuel volumes. And part of the obligation that the agency has is that they need to consider what is happening with supply and demand, what is the price, and how this is impacting other sectors of the economy, such as the food sector. Is there severe harm coming from the program? And so I will pause there because that sort of sets up the framework. And then I'm going to turn it over to Lee to kind of jump in from the commodity side about how the biofuels in particular impacts us directly with soy oil.
Yeah, thanks, Rasma. I mean, as we know, there's been a hugely increased demand for renewable fuels. And so this is certainly impacting the supply and accessibility for the baking industry and for other food stakeholders. And so we started to see over the last year that the prices have come up significantly, over 238%. And so this is something we started really hearing from our members on back in late March of this year. And so started talking to folks about that, getting more information. And then there was an opportunity to talk and share comments with the Secretary of Agriculture, who was looking at supply chain security. And we saw this as a security issue. It's a supply issue. And so we've seen since that time, that initial time when we were studying that, we sent comments in, that accessibility, that supply issue has become more of a crisis, and that's growing daily, and that we expect that to go on into 2022. While we know that the soybean farmers are doing their best, that the soybean oil producers and crushers are working very hard to increase their volumes, we know that's going to take time, 2 to 3 years. And so we need some relief for bakers. We need to make sure that there is stability in the supply chain. And so we've spent a lot of time talking to the chief economist over at USDA, the policy folks in charge of the renewable fuel program over at EPA, Small Business Administration. How does this impact medium and small sized businesses? We've talked to the White House, to the Domestic Policy Council, and then to the staff that's working with the president on his supply chain disruption task force. This was on their radar. This was an issue at the top of their list. And so making sure that we were painting the picture, just like I'm going back, like I said before, talking about what the bakers are facing daily. It's affecting all size bakers. And the fact that, we're still waiting for that announcement to come out for that proposal. There's going to be another opportunity when that proposal comes out for us to lean in more, and then comment on this and make sure that everyone is fully aware of what it means for bakers and food suppliers. We've never seen anything like this. We're in uncharted territory, but I can tell you that it's a real team effort. The whole ABA team and the whole baking industry have really weighed in, and we're hoping that that'll make a difference when that announcement comes out. But when the announcement comes out, there's still, a final rule. And so it's going to be really important to keep the pressure on to talk about, the need for some relief.
If I can jump in, Haley, the team has just done a phenomenal job in raising this issue. I think it's safe to say it's a very esoteric issue that most people don't even think about. But people don't realize soybean oil is ubiquitous in not only baking, but the food industry. It's what allows the industry to create these wonderful, healthier for you products. And so it's just vitally important. I mean, there are alternatives, but each one, has their own set of issues. But it's also, I think, important is there's going to be an opportunity to bring one of our members, and our members have been really engaged in this, and we've done letter writing campaigns, email campaigns, but we're also going to have an opportunity. The team's done a great job where we're going to be able to tell our story in front of Congress next week. And so that's going to be really important. We have what I would say, and I mean this with the utmost respect, kind of your average, baker, who faces all of these challenges is going to be able to tell the industry story on this particular topic in front of Congress. And that doesn't happen. That just doesn't happen. That takes a lot of work behind the scenes. And so it's a great match of our members' subject matter expertise and telling their story with the team's expertise about how Washington really works.
And I think, Haley, I may just add in one other point, kind of looking at from the baker's perspective. I had a chance to chat with a couple of our bakers earlier this week, and one in particular has no access to soy oil through the end of the year is looking at options to swap out oils for some of their products, which they can do. But in particular, for one of their cracker lines, it's just not an option. And so there is some, broader concern about what this may mean longer term, both from the industry's perspective, but also just about the impact that it may have on, kitchen table budgets. What about the disadvantaged communities and some of the food programs that the industry participates in under USDA? We'll see where this goes, and there are certainly opportunities, and we'll continue to push. But there are some true concerns here.
Thank you all. I think that issue is I've read about it. I've put it in our newsletter, but having you all explain it to me really helps. And I think our members and our listeners will also appreciate that. And just to wrap up, we've hit on a lot of important topics today, but I kind of want to leave our listeners with an overall feeling of what you all are seeing ahead. And maybe we'll do a little exercise where I'll call your name and you say one word that you would use to describe the outlook for the baking industry from your perspective. We're doing this in real time. So, Rob, we'll start with you.
Resilient. The industry is going to have to be resilient to get through these choppy waters.
That was a one word and a phrase, but we'll allow it. Okay, Lee.
Roller coaster.
Rasma.
Opportunity for innovation.
Lauren.
Uncertainty of what's coming next.
Let's see. So we had resiliency, roller coaster, opportunity, and
uncertainty.
Uncertainty. Okay.
And Haley, it just shows a whole bunch of us from Washington have a real hard time being brief and concise.
I think we did a good job today, though. And I really appreciate the whole team coming on and sharing what bakers need to know. I think this was really helpful. And I think it was leaving me with a lot to think about. All right. And with that, I will let our listeners know that they can let us know what they thought of the show by emailing hello@americanbakers.org or leave us a voicemail at baketothefuture.org. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, whether it's Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Amazon Music, or Ghana.
Bake to the Future is brought to you by the American Bakers Association in partnership with Human Factor. To hear upcoming and past episodes, go to baketothefuture.org. Bake to the Future is produced by Haley Blumenreich. Audio engineer is Blake Alton. And A Slice of the Action is written by the American Bakers Association's Government Relations team.